What happens when you challenge God's chosen leader? When jealousy, prejudice, and rebellion collide, the consequences are unforgettable, and the punishment is swift. Moses, the great deliverer of Israel, had a wife that no one expected. She was a Cushite, a dark-skinned woman from a land beyond Egypt. But when his own family rose against him because of this marriage, they didn't just question his choice. They questioned his authority. What followed was a stunning divine intervention, one that left a lasting mark on history. This isn't just a love story. It's a tale of judgment, redemption, and a warning that echoes through time. Welcome to Mindful Musing, a journey with God, where faith comes alive, and every story reminds us that the God of yesterday is still the God of today. Here, we dive deep into the untold wonders of Scripture, immersive, emotional, powerful. Stories that stir your spirit, ignite your faith, and draw you closer to the heart of God. Subscribe now and join the journey, as we step into one of the most astonishing moments in all of biblical history. The Israelites had seen miracles, the plagues that shattered Egypt, the parting of the Red Sea, the fire that descended upon Mount Sinai. They had walked under the leadership of Moses, God's chosen prophet, the one who led them toward freedom. But what they had not expected, what Miriam and Aaron had not expected, was Moses' marriage. His wife was a Cushite woman, different from them, from a distant land with unfamiliar customs. And in their hearts, doubt crept in. They spoke against him, not in whispers, but boldly. Was Moses truly the only one God spoke through? Could they not lead as well? But rebellion disguised as jealousy is dangerous. And before their words could spread further, God himself intervened, with judgment so shocking that the camp would never forget. The wilderness stretched endlessly before them. The Israelites, weary from their journey, followed Moses with unwavering trust. He was their leader, the one chosen by God, the man through whom miracles flowed like water from a rock. But today, whispers rippled through the camp. Not of manna or war, not of the promised land that still lay ahead. Today, the whispers were about Moses himself. And at the center of it all was his wife. She was different. A Cushite woman, dark-skinned, regal, her presence a contrast to the familiar faces of Israel. Her name was not widely spoken among them. But her existence was known. And with that knowledge came something far more dangerous than curiosity, resentment. Moses had always been a man set apart. Raised in Pharaoh's palace, trained among Egypt's rulers yet drawn toward his enslaved brethren, he had never truly belonged to one world. And now, it seemed, that divide had followed him even here, into the heart of his own people. Some accepted his marriage without question. They had seen greater things than the union of two souls. What was one woman compared to the parting of the Red Sea? But not everyone felt that way. It started with glances. Miriam, standing among the tents, watching Moses walk with his wife, the way they spoke in quiet tones, the way her presence was always beside him. Aaron, thoughtful, his fingers resting against his beard, his expression unreadable. At first, their thoughts were their own. Private. Unspoken. Then, one evening, Miriam exhaled sharply, frustration spilling into words. Has God spoken only through Moses? Aaron, silent for a moment, turned to her. He has spoken through us too. There it was, the seed planted. The whisper turned into something heavier. A questioning. A challenge. And beneath that challenge, a deeper resentment burned. They did not hide their feelings for long. Miriam and Aaron, emboldened by their frustration, spoke against Moses. It was not merely his leadership they questioned, but his choice in a wife. Why a Cushite woman? Why someone so different? Had he strayed from the people he was chosen to lead? The tension grew. The murmurs spread. And then, God spoke. It came swiftly. The Lord summoned Moses, Aaron, and Miriam to the entrance of the tent of meeting. The air was heavy. The presence of God undeniable. Then, his voice thundered. When there is a prophet among you, I reveal myself in visions, I speak in dreams. A pause, a stillness deeper than silence itself. But with my servant Moses, it is different. Face to face I speak to him. Clearly, not in riddles. He sees the very form of the Lord. And then, the words that sent terror through them. Why then were you not afraid to speak against my servant? The moment hung suspended in the air. And as the presence of the Lord departed, Miriam gasped, her hand flying to her face. Her skin was white as snow. Leprosy. The weight of judgment had fallen. And the fear that followed would reshape them forever. The silence that followed Miriam's affliction was suffocating. The sun still burned overhead. The wind still curled through the camp. But within the heart of Israel, everything had changed. Moments ago, she had spoken against Moses. Moments ago, she had challenged the one whom God himself had chosen. Now, she trembled in horror, staring at the pale, death-like transformation of her skin, leprosy. This was no ordinary sickness. This was a divine judgment. And everyone saw it. Aaron stood frozen beside her, his breath caught in his throat. It had happened so fast. One moment, the rebuke from God rang in the air. The next, Miriam bore the curse of her rebellion upon her own body. She turned to Aaron, her lips quivering. Her hands shook. Fear was alive in her eyes, the kind of fear that stripped away pride and left nothing but desperation. Aaron gasped, stepping forward. My Lord, he stammered, turning to Moses. Do not hold this sin against us. Moses watched him, saying nothing. We have acted foolishly, sinned against you, Aaron continued, voice breaking. He gestured helplessly toward Miriam, her sickness spreading across her arms, her face, her very breath turning labored. Do not let her be like one born dead. His voice rose, pleading, his sister wasting away before his very eyes. Moses looked at Miriam, then Aaron. This was the woman who had once protected him as a child, watching over him in the waters of the Nile. She had stood beside him as he led their people into freedom. And yet, she had turned against him. But Moses was not a man of vengeance. He had never sought power for himself. And now, despite the wound of betrayal, his heart ached for her. He lifted his hands toward the heavens. O God, please heal her. His words were not filled with anger. Not with bitterness. Only mercy. The response came swiftly, as clear as the judgment itself. If her father had spit in her face, the voice of the Lord declared, would she not be disgraced for 7 days? A pause, long enough for them all to grasp the meaning of the words. Let her be shut outside the camp for 7 days. After that, she may be brought back. The punishment was sealed. Mercy was given, but justice would not be erased. The people trembled as Miriam was led away, exiled from the camp, stripped from the presence of her people, left in isolation under the weight of her own sin. For 7 days, she remained outside the city. For 7 days, the camp did not move forward, as if Israel itself was forced to pause, to acknowledge what had happened, to feel the weight of divine judgment settling upon them. When the 7th day came, Miriam was allowed to return. Her skin was restored. Her body was whole again. But she was not the same woman who had spoken against Moses. She had learned. She had felt the consequence of challenging God's chosen leader, of speaking out in arrogance, of questioning divine authority. And Israel had learned too. No one challenged Moses again. No one spoke against him without fear. And the whispers that had once spread through the camp, questioning his leadership and his marriage, were silenced. The fear of the Lord was upon Israel, and it was a fear that demanded reverence, obedience, and honesty. Miriam's leprosy had not just been her punishment, it was a warning for all. A warning that reverberated through generations, a moment that would never be forgotten. And from that day on, Israel moved forward. But they did so with caution. With fear. With respect for the God who did not tolerate rebellion. The sun had risen on the 8th day. The wilderness stretched endlessly, the Israelites still camped in silent anticipation. Miriam had returned from her exile, her skin restored, her body whole, but something had changed. She had learned. And more importantly, Israel had learned too. The rebellion that had started with whispers had ended with judgment, one so swift and undeniable that no one could forget the fear it left behind. But fear alone was never the lesson. The lesson was respect, reverence before the authority of God and the leaders he had chosen. The Israelites would never be the same. Miriam had once stood proudly among Israel. She had been known not just as Moses' sister, but as a prophetess, a leader, a voice that had guided their steps. She had danced on the shores of the Red Sea, leading the women in songs of triumph after Pharaoh's army had been swallowed beneath the waters. But now, she was silent. There was no dancing. No singing. Only the weight of what had happened lingering in the air around her. She walked through the camp, eyes lowered, every gaze upon her. Not in judgment. Not in mockery. But in understanding. Because every man, woman, and child had felt the terror of her exile. And none of them had forgotten the moment her skin turned deathly white, the moment God himself rebuked her before the entire nation. She was not just a leader now. She was a lesson. Before this moment, Moses had faced countless challenges. He had endured Israel's complaints, their cries for food, their fears in the wilderness, their doubts about survival. He had seen rebellion rise before, from Pharaoh, from the people when they built the golden calf, from those who longed to return to Egypt instead of pressing forward. But never had it come from those closest to him. Never had his own siblings questioned him like this. And yet, in the aftermath, Moses did not stand as a man hardened by betrayal. He stood stronger. Because now, all of Israel had seen what happened when leadership was challenged, not by war, not by enemy nations, but by pride within their own ranks. No one questioned Moses again. Not because he demanded loyalty. But because God had already sealed the matter with his own hand. Miriam's rebellion had been more than just a family dispute. It had been an attempt to elevate herself, to claim equal leadership, to suggest that Moses, the one chosen by God, was no different from her. But the price of that claim had been swift, undeniable, and public. Her exile, her leprosy, her restoration, it was not just about her own lesson. It was for all of Israel. And it did not stop with her generation. For years, centuries, this story would be told. It would be a warning to leaders, to nations, to anyone who dared rise against divine authority with pride instead of humility. It would remind them that God's choices were not suggestions. They were final. And to stand against them was to stand against the Almighty Himself. As the Israelites packed their tents and prepared to move forward, there was no more hesitation. No more whispers of doubt. No more murmurs questioning Moses' leadership. Instead, there was fear, a holy fear, a reverence that shaped their steps, their decisions, their respect for the one chosen to lead them. And Miriam? She walked among them, changed but not broken. She had been restored. She had been forgiven. But she would never forget. And neither would they. The Israelites moved forward, but Moses carried the weight of what had happened. Miriam had been restored, but the memory of her leprosy, her exile, and God's direct rebuke lingered. More than just a lesson for Israel, it was a warning to Moses himself. Leadership wasn't just about guiding a people, it was about standing firm even when the closest voices turn against you. And soon, Moses would face challenges far greater than family rebellion. Moses had seen many battles. Not just those against enemy nations, but against the very people he was called to lead. Miriam's challenge had shaken Israel, but deeper doubt still lingered in the hearts of some. How long would they wander? Had Moses truly heard from God? Was he leading them toward promise or toward ruin? And soon, another rebellion would rise, greater, deadlier, and with stakes that no man could control. Moses had no time for weakness. No time for hesitation. God had called him. And now, Israel would see exactly what that meant. Miriam's exile had humbled Israel, others still sought power. Among them was Korah, a man filled with ambition, a leader among the Levites who was not content with following Moses. Korah gathered followers, whispering to men of influence. "We are all holy, why should Moses alone lead us?" It was a dangerous question. A question that, once spoken, planted seeds of rebellion in hearts already weary from the wilderness. Israel had learned from Miriam's punishment. But they had not learned enough. And this time, the judgment would be far more severe. Korah's rebellion exploded into the open, challenging Moses before all of Israel. Hundreds gathered, eyes filled with doubt and defiance. Korah's words spread like wildfire. Had Moses led them astray? Was his authority truly from God? And once again, Moses stood before a nation filled with murmurs, with accusations, with restless uncertainty. This wasn't just about his leadership anymore. This was about God himself. And this time, the earth would answer. Moses did not fight Korah. He did not shout. He simply fell on his face before God, waiting for his response. And it came. The earth shook beneath their feet. Sudden. Violent. Unstoppable. And then, it opened. A great chasm split the ground beneath Korah and his men, swallowing them whole. Screams pierced the air. Men fell into the abyss, their rebellion erased in an instant. And when the earth sealed itself once more, all that remained was silence. No whispers. No doubts. Only fear, the raw, undeniable fear of God himself. The rebellion ended in a moment. But the lesson lasted for generations. Just as Miriam had learned, so did all of Israel. No one challenged Moses again. No one questioned whether his leadership was divine. And as they journeyed forward, toward the land promised to them, they understood at last. Moses was not just a man. He was God's chosen prophet. And to rise against him was to rise against the Almighty himself. The wilderness stretched endlessly before them. For decades, Moses had led the Israelites, through war, through rebellion, through moments of divine power that reshaped history itself. Now, his time was drawing to a close. The promised land stood on the horizon. But Moses would never enter it. Moses had heard the voice of God in fire. In storms. In whispers carried through the desert winds. But this time, as he stood atop Mount Nebo, overlooking the land he had fought to bring his people to, the words carried weight unlike ever before. You will see the land, but you will not enter it. Moses did not argue. He did not plead for mercy. He understood. The choices of his journey had already been sealed, his leadership, his failings, his moments of anger. And now, he had only one task left. Before he left, Moses gathered Israel one last time. They stood before him, not as the murmuring, rebellious nation they once were, but as a people ready to inherit their destiny. The lessons had been learned. The trials endured. But now, Moses did not speak of war. He did not speak of power. Instead, he gave them wisdom, words that would shape their nation long after he was gone. And among those words was one lasting warning. Do not forget the Lord your God. For he knew, prosperity could be just as dangerous as suffering. And if Israel turned away from God once they settled, the judgment would come again. Moses was not afraid of death. But he was concerned for Israel's future. Who would lead them? Who would carry the burden that had weighed on his shoulders for so long? He turned to Joshua, the man God had chosen. And before the people, Moses placed his hand upon Joshua's shoulder. The blessing passed. The authority sealed. And with that, a new leader stepped forward. Israel would go on. But without Moses. Alone, Moses walked up Mount Nebo. He could feel the weight of his years. The memories of Egypt, the fire of Sinai, the cries of the people. All of it echoed in his mind. At the peak, he stood in silence. And before him stretched the promised land. The land of promise. The land of covenant. And though his feet would never touch its soil, his soul knew he had completed his mission. The Lord's presence wrapped around him. And then, he was gone. No one saw his burial. No one knew where he lay. But his name would never be forgotten. Moses was not just a man. Not just a prophet. He was a symbol. A leader unlike any before him. The one who parted the sea. The one who stood before Pharaoh and called down plagues upon Egypt. The one who spoke to God face to face. And though he did not enter the promised land, his legacy was carried by every generation to come. Moses was gone, but his presence never truly left Israel. The man who had stood before Pharaoh, who had called down plagues, who had parted the Red Sea, the one who had led them, taught them, pleaded with God on their behalf, he was no longer among them. Yet his name was carried in every breath of history. Moses was never just a ruler. He was chosen. From the burning bush to the final mountaintop, he walked in the impossible, leading people who sometimes resisted, sometimes doubted, yet always followed. Because they knew, Moses was not just a man. He was a voice between earth and heaven. A prophet unlike any before him. Long after his footsteps had faded, his words remained. They shaped the laws of Israel, the foundation of a nation that would stand for generations to come. The commandments, the words written by the very hand of God, would never be forgotten. Not in the desert. Not in war. Not even in exile. Moses had given them truth, and truth could not be erased. Though Moses never entered the promised land, his people did. They carried his legacy with them like a fire that could not be extinguished. And when they crossed the Jordan, when they planted their feet on the soil of Canaan, Moses' mission was complete. His burial place was unknown. His resting place was hidden. But Moses never needed a monument. He was a monument himself, a man whose story stretched beyond time, beyond borders, beyond nations. A leader whose journey had shaped the destiny of a people. And that destiny would never die. Moses' story isn't just history, it's a testament to leadership, faith, and divine power. From humble beginnings in Egypt to standing on the edge of the promised land, his journey was shaped by trials, rebellion, and unwavering purpose. But his legacy doesn't end here. The lessons of his life, obedience, resilience, and reverence for God's authority, continue to echo through time. They are lessons we still wrestle with today. So now, it's your turn. What will you take from Moses' story? How does his leadership inspire your journey? Which moment from his life resonated with you the most? Drop your thoughts, reflections, and insights. Let's keep the conversation alive and let Moses' legacy keep inspiring generations to come.